In the shadows of history lie doors that were welded shut, their hinges buried beneath stone, silence, and denial. Behind them are fragments of a war that never ended, files with missing pages, machines whose blueprints were swallowed by fire, and whispers of experiments no nation dares confess. What was locked away was never destroyed. It waits, like an echo in the dark, for the day the archives are opened and the forbidden light spills through the cracks. In the spring of 1945, as the Reich collapsed in on itself and Berlin became a fortress city under siege, Allied command was already pivoting toward a new and uncertain geopolitical order. Amid the confusion of April, with the Red Army pressing from the east and Montgomery's forces breaching the Elbe, a little-known British intelligence unit operating under the umbrella of SHAF, Special Section X of the London Controlling Section, received a tip from a captured SS signals officer that a convoy of couriers was moving from Weimar toward Berchtesgaden carrying scientific archives of highest priority. The officer, an Untersturmführer named Dieter Knecht, broke only under prolonged interrogation at a field cage near Hanover, describing sealed crates marked Eclipse, guarded by men from the SS Wissenschaftsdienst, a research arm with ties to the Reich's most secretive programs. Acting on this, SHAF issued a directive to 21st Army Group Intelligence, assigning a small detachment of the 30 Assault Unit, Naval Intelligence's specialized raiding force led by Ian Fleming's hand-picked officers, to intercept the couriers. Reports indicate the ambush occurred on April 12, 1945, on the Thuringian roads near Bad Salzungen, where armored cars were found abandoned, their guards killed in a firefight. Inside were crates sealed in wax and stamped with eagle and swastika. Seals, each containing files typed on carbon copy onion paper, meticulously catalogued with code names and reference numbers. The surviving inventory sheets describe projects ranging from Höhenjäger, high-altitude interceptors, to Jarrett 1045 dispersal mechanisms linked to radiological studies. Several documents referenced obscure research facilities under the Harz Mountains, specifically a site near Nordhausen, where Mittelwerk engineers had already. On the night of April 8, 1940, as German forces prepared to execute Operation Weserübung, the invasion of Norway and Denmark, fishermen along the darkened inlets of Narvik reported an unusual flotilla slipping quietly through the fjords under the cover of Luftwaffe flares. Local accounts describe 4 to 6 merchant hulls, stripped of national markings, escorted by smaller Kriegsmarine patrol craft, and shielded by Junkers Ju-88 bombers flying high above in staggered formation. The operation, never acknowledged in official German naval logs, coincided with the initial phases of the Narvik landings, suggesting the convoy used the confusion of battle as cover. Norwegian resistance sources later captured by the British in 1942 confirmed that the vessels carried Sonderfracht, special freight, loaded from Hamburg days prior, reportedly under Gestapo guard and sealed in armored containers. Signals, intercepts from Bletchley Park, decrypted under Ultra but later withheld from broader dissemination, indicated coordination with U-boat wolfpacks bound for South America, specifically referencing ports in Mar del Plata and Buenos Aires. Yet no Allied pursuit or post-war investigation ever documented the arrival of those ships. What complicates the mystery further is the testimony of Soviet naval intelligence officers, who, during the 1960s, admitted that Red Fleet divers had searched the Narvik fjords extensively, believing the convoy may have been scuttled under orders to prevent capture. Declassified fragments from the Norwegian Defence Staff archives, dated 1974, reveal that local trawlers began recovering odd metallic debris in their nets, slabs of steel with crystalline structures inconsistent with known wartime alloys. Analysts speculated that the containers may have housed experimental machine parts or weapons prototypes, possibly linked to Reich research in atomic metallurgy. NATO dismissed such claims as Cold War exaggerations, yet internal memos from the Norwegian Ministry of Defence noted that several fishermen involved in the discoveries died under suspicious circumstances, their reports never publicly released. The fate of the Narvik convoy remains absent from Kriegsmarine loss tables, raising the enduring question of whether Germany's most sensitive technological cargo vanished into the fjords or reached safe harbour across the Atlantic under the fog of a new and uncertain world order. In official Wehrmacht records, Ausbildungslager A92 appeared as nothing more than a mountain training site in the Bavarian Alps, catalogued in late 1943 as a minor facility intended for Gebirgsjäger exercises. Yet, local testimonies collected by US occupation forces in the summer of 1945 painted a very different picture. Villagers from the nearby town of Oberammergau reported sealed trains arriving under Gestapo guard, their freight cars packed not with equipment, but with prisoners, political detainees from Dachau, identified by their striped uniforms and yellow stars. None were ever seen leaving. An OSS field report, dated August 11, 1945, included aerial photographs taken by reconnaissance flights of the 10th Photo Reconnaissance Group. The images revealed vast ventilation shafts carved into the rock, unusually, heavy electrical lines feeding into the mountain, and camouflaged entrances consistent with hardened underground galleries. These findings contradicted the simple barracks description logged in Wehrmacht paperwork. Surviving fragments from the Bundesarchive, classified until the late 1980s, refer to Project Sonnenmaschine in relation to A92, though no technical specifications accompany the codename. Engineers from Organisation TOT were said to have supervised the site, using forced labour to hollow caverns large enough to house entire railcars. After the collapse of the Reich, US forces dynamited all visible access tunnels under the pretext of preventing accidents, yet internal Army Corps of Engineers correspondence speaks of denied access following seizure of sensitive material. A curious footnote emerges from the testimony of a CIC officer, Captain Howard Ellis, who wrote in a private letter to his wife that something unnatural had been buried there, something Washington insisted remained sealed. By 1952, the area was restricted and designated off-limits to civilians, guarded briefly by US troops before being handed to Bavarian authorities. The caves remain collapsed, but maps of cable routes and ventilation grids, recovered decades later by researchers, hint at chambers never fully explored. For the families of the vanished prisoners, silence was the only answer offered. For historians, the silence of Camp A92 stands as a reminder that certain wartime facilities were not erased merely to conceal atrocities, but to bury the technology and ambition of a regime that sought to weaponize both science and human suffering beneath the Alpine stone. In the first months following Germany's surrender in May 1945, as Allied forces occupied the shattered remains of the Reich, US Counterintelligence Corps, CIC, detachments combed through abandoned Gestapo headquarters and Abwehr stations for surviving archives. In Frankfurt, one such search led to the discovery of fragmented cipher pads and radio logs, referencing a project codenamed Harlequin. Though never listed in Abwehr command directives, the files suggested an encrypted communications scheme designed to keep sleeper cells active in neutral states, Portugal, Spain, Sweden, and even Switzerland, long after the fall of Berlin. The recovered transcripts contained only partial phrases, but one line in particular alarmed analysts. Transit secured for Wissenschaftspersonal via Lisbon corridor. This appeared to indicate that networks were facilitating the escape of German scientific staff through Iberian ports, the same routes later used by notorious SS men fleeing under the so-called rat lines. The CIC report, dated September 2, 1945, was logged as Case 4177H and marked Restricted, Allied Eyes Only. Yet by the following year, the original evidence had vanished from the Frankfurt document depot. Officers who handled the materials, among them Lieutenant Richard Halloran, testified in closed briefings that they had personally catalogued the cipher sheets before they were requisitioned by higher command. The timing coincided with the earliest transfers of German scientists under Operation Paperclip, the covert US program that relocated former Reich experts to American laboratories. Several surviving memos hint that Harlequin assets, trained in clandestine wireless and sabotage, were quietly absorbed into early NATO intelligence frameworks during the escalating tensions of the Cold War. By the 1950s, Portuguese police records show unexplained arrests of German émigrés in Lisbon, carrying radio parts and microdots, their connection to the wartime Harlequin network never officially acknowledged. British MI6 archives released in 1998 contain references to phantom stations, broadcasting in obsolete Wehrmacht cipher bands well into the 1950s, transmissions that analysts suspected were relics of Harlequin cells operating without clear aim masters. The true scope of the network, and whether its assets acted as fugitives, mercenaries, or state-sanctioned operatives, remains buried beneath layers of Cold War secrecy, a reminder of how the intelligence war did not end in 1945, but simply shifted its allegiances. Among the scattered, heavily redacted files recovered from Soviet Smersh archives in the 1990s lies a chilling reference to Operacja Czarna Zima, Operation Black Winter, an NKVD-directed mission carried out in late May 1945 in the Im Sudetenland. Then newly wrested from collapsing German forces, the documents describe intelligence that Nazi units retreating into the Erzgebirge had sealed underground chambers inside disused tungsten and tin mines, chambers reportedly containing special containers marked only with the Reichsadler insignia and numeric codes. Soviet assault engineers from the 12th Guards Army, accompanied by chemical warfare specialists, were ordered to breach the sites. Surviving mission logs indicate that within the first shaft explored near Yakimov, operatives discovered crates, lined in lead and heavily tarred against moisture, alongside gas masks of an unfamiliar design. Several soldiers became violently ill after handling the materials, suffering from fever, bleeding gums, and hemorrhagic symptoms later recorded in Smersh medical notes as unclassified contagion. NKVD commander Ivan Serov personally signed the order to seal the mine and detonate explosives to prevent further exposure. Additional sites in the Krukonosha Mountains were likewise located and destroyed. Yet Smersh records suggest that samples were quietly removed to Moscow for study. Western intelligence never acknowledged these events, though in the late 1940s, NATO wargame scenarios repeatedly included references to unknown threat vectors emanating from Czechoslovakia, a phrase that some historians argue reflects awareness of Black Winter's findings. Local Czech miners interviewed decades later recalled how entire valleys were cordoned off by Soviet patrols for weeks at a time, with rumors of livestock dying suddenly and water sources contaminated. Declassified CIA memoranda from 1953 mention intercepted Soviet cables referring obliquely to Erzgebirge material, though no further clarification is provided. Whether Black Winter uncovered abandoned Nazi biowarfare stockpiles, failed experimental pathogens, or simply toxic industrial waste remains uncertain, but the secrecy, the sudden illness of soldiers, and the deliberate demolition of the mines point to something more than routine ordnance disposal. To this day, Czech authorities quietly warn against entering certain collapsed shafts in the region, officially citing the risk of unstable ground. Yet in the footnotes of forgotten Soviet reports, Operation Black Winter endures as a shadow on the post-war landscape, an episode erased from public history, but not from the memories of those who dug into the frozen soil and found what the Reich had intended never to be seen again. Some secrets are not written in ink, but in silence, carved into the earth, guarded by the absence of answers. What the world calls forgotten may only be sleeping, waiting beneath ruined bunkers, coded transmissions, and sealed vaults of ash. As long as the archives remain incomplete, the truth itself is a battlefield, one where shadows outlive soldiers, and the past is never truly past, but a weapon waiting to be unearthed.